Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming to the London Show. And thank you for coming to see us on our slightly belated talk. So this year we've got quite a lot of news. It's going to be quite a busy talk, so I'll try and squeeze it in, so strap yourselves in. The first news is the most important one. So RISC OS is now finally open source. And what does this mean? It means we've republished all the stuff that was under the Castle license under an Apache license, which is a true open source license. So it wasn't an easy decision. It required quite a bit of conversation. Sorry, just move this. Can I use the hand mic? Yeah, thank you. I'll just switch to that. Thank you. Ah, that's much better. Okay. So it was a difficult decision. We had quite a lot of conversations with RISC OS developments. As you can probably guess from our name, this was our original objective. So before we set up RISC OS Open, we were having conversations with Castle about open sourcing RISC OS, and the Castle license Andrew was alluding to was the best we could manage with them at the time. So it's their own homebrew version of open source, which wasn't at all open source. So it is the third most popular open source license, Apache. It is, that's after MIT and GPL, I believe. But it is particularly well known, and I think most people find it to be not an objectionable license. It's free as in beer, so it is free as in you can use RISC OS without having to pay on anyone any money. So if you want to download RISC OS from our website, put it in a product and then sell a product, you don't have to ask anyone's permission, you don't have to give anyone any money. That's how it works. So that's what this type of open source means, which is very different to the Castle shared source model, where if you wanted to build a product and sell it for money, then Castle wanted a cut of that money. Effectively, they wanted a royalty on the copy of RISC OS that you were building into your product. Now, it's not what's termed copyleft, the Apache license, and this is a type of open source which means that the license conditions that this source code is published under need to be compatible with the license code conditions of the other source code that you want to build your product against. And some open source licenses, that's quite restrictive, so it limits what sort of other pieces of code you can build your product into your products. Apache is not copyleft, which means it's less restrictive, which means you can use it in a wider range of products and projects. It does involve a certain amount of patent protection, which things like the BSD license doesn't provide. And what this really means is someone cannot use the patent mechanism to bypass the fact that this is open source. So if, for example, I were to take a copy of RISC OS under the Apache open source license, shove in some of my code that has my patents in it, and then start selling it and charging people royalties for my patents, what this Apache license does is say, no, you're not allowed to do that. As soon as you do that, we revoke the license from you. You don't have the rights to use this source code because you're trying to circumvent the fact that this is free by shoving your own patents and charging royalties on those. So it has protection against that, which means it's guaranteeing basically that the derivatives of this aren't being polluted by other people's intellectual property, which is good. The other benefit is because of, as I said, it's not copyleft, and for various reasons, it plays nicely with the other licenses that are already in the RISC OS source code tree. So if you look on our website at RISC OS's source code, you will find that there are various other licenses there, like BSD and I forget, CDDL and a few others. Oh, got some noise. So it cooperates with those licenses rather than conflicts with them, which is kind of important. So what does this mean? Well, for users and developers, this is a good thing. And I'll explain why. It basically boils down to the virtuous circle that I've talked about in previous talks, where users, they have certain needs. So users want to see new features, they want to see bugs fixed, they want new applications building in RISC OS. Those needs feed the developers. The developers are the ones that can satisfy those needs. And the whole point of developers existing is to see users' needs and deliver stuff to help address them. Once they've developed their new stuff, that completes the virtuous circle and gives the users what they want, but it also attracts new users. And more users in a community means it's going to be a more vibrant community. And the same thing applies to more developers. So anything we can do that lowers the barriers that stop new developers coming into the community is a good thing. If we can eliminate the barriers, we can have more developers satisfying more needs, creating more apps and features, and encouraging more users to come and try RISC OS and enjoy the experience. So the open sourcing is enabling this virtuous circle more than it was enabled before the open sourcing. The Castle license was definitely a barrier. It's not to say it's the only barrier, it's one barrier and now it's gone. There are challenges remaining. Andrew alluded to these challenges, some of them. Forks and closed products. These are all completely permitted under the Apache license. They are completely normal. They're not alien and strange, and they're not illegal. If you want to take RISC OS and create your own RISC OS based product or project, and you want to host it on the web and you want to call it RISC OS Broad or RISC OS Wide or something, you can do that. There's no reason why you can't. Nothing in the Apache license is going to stop you. And there's a danger we could think of these as bad, we could think of them as the enemy. And they can typically kind of dilute the community. If you don't know which fork you're supposed to use, you can end up being a bit confused. So it should be avoided where possible, and I think if we have forks, it displays the fact that we're not addressing the needs of the community to some degree. But if a fork were to come along and it was to be wildly successful, I don't think anyone would complain, because I think wildly successful is probably a phrase that's not been associated with RISC OS for a long time. So if RISC OS Open wasn't the wildly successful fork and some other fork was, I would still celebrate. Closed source products, they're also perfectly normal, and I think there's no reason why we should discourage them. If someone wants to spend money building a product which happens to use RISC OS, I think typically modern developers, such as me, with a mindset that's conducive to using open source, we always want to find a way to feed back into the community. It doesn't matter whether the product we build is still closed source and we're not feeding that code back, we'll find some other way to support the community. I do that in my day job. So even closed products aren't the enemy. They're not something to avoid, they're something to encourage. The more you've got people building products with RISC OS in them, whether it's open or closed, the more you think this is a thriving operating system. It's a living operating system. It's definitely a sign it's not dead. Having said all that, what can we do to try and minimise the fragmentation of RISC OS that could happen? Well, we have to be the hub that reflects the needs of the community, so we have to listen to what the community is saying. What are their needs? What do they want? We have to react to their needs, so we have to find ways to make new stuff happen that is the stuff the community wants. If we're consistently failing to deliver the stuff the community wants, someone somewhere will fork it and put that thing into RISC OS. So we need to make sure that when things are added to RISC OS or changes happen or bugs are fixed, they're the things that people are asking for. Going backwards now. We need to be transparent. What are we doing? What are we planning on doing? Why are we doing it? This needs to be communicated to the community. If we're completely closed doors and it's a black hole, then no one's going to want to work with RISC OS Open. They're going to want to do it themselves and be more transparent themselves. And we need to promote what is RISC OS Open, what do we do? We are the hub of RISC OS community. We are the mediators of what goes into RISC OS. We're the people that try and connect the dots, that put people together and make conversations happen. We're the ones that try and encourage new people to use RISC OS. That's what RISC OS Open is. And we need to continue with that. We need to continue pushing to make sure new blood is coming into RISC OS all the time. And finally, we need to maintain quality. I believe an important part of our job as custodians of the RISC OS repository, currently the only fork of RISC OS, I believe our job is to maintain a good level of quality that we expect from RISC OS. If we let any old changes in and we let the quality drop and people start having a bad experience with RISC OS, they're going to create a new fork, they're going to fix those bugs, they're going to operate it differently, and people are going to start using that one. So again, to minimise the chance of forks that are detrimental, we need to maintain the quality of RISC OS. Another barrier that I'm sure lots of people will be aware of, and it's part of the conversations on the web already, is the development tools. So this is a bit odd. The desktop development tools, you have to buy them from Rule, from RISC OS Open, and they're £50. And now we've just published RISC OS for free open source. So if you want to get into developing RISC OS, you can't use any old toolchain, you have to use ours. And you have to pay £50 for the privilege. But RISC OS is free, but they're £50. So it's a problem, and it's a barrier. Having said that, £50 for those tools, it's not bad. They're £1,500 per seat if you want to buy them from ARM, the ARM tools. You can't build RISC OS with the ARM tools, but if you wanted to build something with them, that's what you're going to have to pay. Having said that, GCC is free. So there's another tool chain that there is in the Linux world which is completely free. So this is a problem. And we recognise that. It is a nuanced issue. The tool chain that we use has complicated licenses attached to it, complicated reasons why we sell it for what we sell it, reasons why it's closed source even. It's also complex because it is kind of an important revenue stream for RISC OS Open. Selling the development tools has helped sustain RISC OS Open through the 12 years that we've been operating. If we were to suddenly say, right, the development tools are free, that's a substantial chunk of income every year that we're going to have to figure out how to replace. So it's not an easy decision, but it's a decision I feel that we need to make. What are we going to do to remove this barrier? So it is a hot topic within RISC OS Open, and we will tell you the outcome of our conversations soon. But I, for one, believe that we need to remove this barrier as well. Next, another challenge for getting into RISC OS is it has a steep learning curve. And what does that mean? The whole source tree, there's a couple of gigabytes worth of stuff there, I think. You have to get your head around what is it all, what's this directory structure, what do all these things mean, what's the relationships between the different bits, what do they all do, what does all this source code mean? You know, some of it's written in ARM assembly language, some of it's written in C. I mean, ARM assembly language now is fairly esoteric as a skill set. Even C is a minority language nowadays. So understanding what it is, how it works, is quite hard for most developers from outside the community. There's also our tool chain and the processes we use. How do you build stuff? How do you get hold of stuff? The fact it all lives in CVS, which I think CVS as a technology and as a workflow is completely alien to every modern developer outside of the RISC OS world. It's another barrier. So we need to do things about this. We have some ideas. But stepping back from the detail that I've just mentioned, one thing we could do, and we've been talking we could do some developer workshops. So we could teach some developers about how to develop in RISC OS. We could teach them what's the organisation of all of the stuff in the source tree and how does it all work, how does it all hang together, how do you build things. This is hard because it takes quite a lot of organising to do a workshop like that. It takes a lot of preparation and it can include quite a bit of expense. So I kind of like the idea, and we've been talking to RISC OS developments about doing this, but on the other hand I recognise it's a lot of time and effort. The other route is, and I like this one, is you could do some tutorial videos, getting started videos of how do you do all this stuff. You go here, you download this lot, you do these things. It's a lot more repeatable. If you do a workshop, it's kind of a one-time thing. You have to either be there or you're not. They don't really lend themselves to being videos because it's quite a boring watch to watch a workshop. But a really focused video on how to do development in RISC OS could be quite useful. But still, it takes time and it takes energy to produce one. One thing I would say is that it doesn't have to be RISC OS Open that creates this thing. It could be any experienced developer from the RISC OS community could take it upon themselves. There's some of the stuff I'm not really going to talk about, but let me just say the fact that CVS exists is, I think, a major blocker that we could fix. Moving on, there are a couple of bits called binary blobs. There's a couple of bits of the RISC OS source tree that are not open source, still. There are 3 modules, in fact. MBUF Manager, Resolver and Chefs. And they are closed source. So we don't have the rights to publish the source code to these 3 modules. So this gives us 3 options, I think. One option is to ignore them and just get on with the fact that RISC OS is fine without them, but I'm not particularly happy about that. I feel like they're a fly in the ointment. They're a part of the RISC OS release that kind of spoils the fact that the rest of it is open source. We can clean room re-implement them. So what that means is someone writes a specification for how this thing's supposed to behave, gives that to another developer, and that developer then just completely re-implements it so that it still provides the same features and functionality, but it was done without looking at the source code, so you've not violated anyone's copyright. That's also an option, but we've done it before. We've done it with MindMap, but it's still quite hard work, especially with Sharefus. And the third option is to get some lawyers. It's a good one. So for about the first 5 years of RISC OS's existence, I spent quite a lot of time negotiating with a company called Espial, who were the company that took over Ant, who were the company that wrote these modules. And it was quite difficult because there were very few people left who remembered anything about these things. And after 5 years, we got to the point of having written a contract. And we had an agreement in principle from the guy at Espial to sign the contract. And then it went to their lawyers and disappeared forever because they couldn't find the time to actually bother to read the contract and give it the okay. So the solution, as far as I'm concerned, and we've been talking to RISC OS developments about this, is to go to Espial. Now there's no one left who knows what the heck any of this is, and offer to grease some wheels by writing a simple contract, giving them 500 quid or whatever it takes for their lawyers to look at it and say, yes, that's okay, and then publish all 3 of these things under a proper open source license. If you can do that for 500, £1,000, I'd say it's money well spent. Let's get rid of these 3 modules as being binary blobs and open source them. In other news, it's not just all about open sourcing. We're back on noobs. I don't know if anyone knows about noobs, it sounds like it from the cheers. More cheers. So noobs is the thing that new Raspberry Pi users are pointed towards to get their Raspberry Pi up and running. And when you run it on your Raspberry Pi, it presents a list of operating systems for you to install. We were on, as RISC OS, we were on noobs from the outset of the Raspberry Pi because we were speaking to Raspberry Pi before Raspberry Pi went public. So we made sure RISC OS ran on Raspberry Pi from the outset. However, about 2 years ago, I think we dropped off noobs because I think Raspberry Pi 3 support took a bit too long to arrive. But now we're back. So I think that was about a week's worth of work for Ben last week, but it's time well spent. The RISC OS and Beagle and RISC OS Panda releases have been made at the show today. We've not really done much fanfare about it because it's fairly mundane, but it means there's parity now between the Raspberry Pi and Beagle and Panda boards, in that if you want RISC OS to work out of the box, you can get an SD card from us which includes both of these. So these platforms now work in the same way as the Raspberry Pi has done for several years now. And a £5,000 bounty matching. So for the remainder of this year, we will match any bounty donation into any of the bounties other than the general bounty. So if you have a donation to make to RISC OS Open, we will match that donation up to the first £5,000. So get donating. And finally, we are actively seeking corporate sponsors. So RISC OS Developments, are they still here? We're looking for people to help us further our plans. And to do that, for example, making the DDE free. If we wanted to do that, it would cost us a significant amount of our income. So supporting RISC OS Open, doing what we need to do, we need more money coming in than just the normal donations. We're looking for people who are supportive of the whole open source ethos, and particularly people who are interested in RISC OS, helping to support us delivering our roadmap. Speaking of which, this is a rough outline of our to-do list. It's not in any particular order, and it's not very far-reaching, but this is the sort of stuff that we're focusing on at the moment. We want to publish a much clearer roadmap about what RISC OS Open is working on and what we believe is important. This is to be more transparent about where people's money are going. When they donate to the general bounty, or when we get a corporate sponsor, you want to tell them what are they getting for their money. And by publishing a roadmap, we can say what we believe is important, but we can say this is the stuff that only RISC OS Open is able to deliver or is able to coordinate. And it might be because of the skills or the knowledge or the privileged information that's involved. It could be anything, but we want to be clear about what we believe RISC OS needs doing, and what order we think it should happen in, and roughly how hard it all is. So that's what we want to do there. We want to make the DDE, the development tools, more accessible. We want to knock down another barrier between people getting into developing RISC OS and the way things currently are. We want to make the source code more accessible. So we want to tackle the CVS problem. We also want to tackle the fact that things like ARM code. There's loads of ARM code in RISC OS sources at the moment, and A, it's esoteric, so no one knows how to write ARM code, and B, it's not very portable, it's hard to maintain, and when 64-bit ARMs come along that have no 32-bit mode, we'll have a problem. So we would like to find ways to move RISC OS out of the world of being quite heavily written in ARM. We're always looking to move our bounties forward. We're always looking to support the developers who are working on it and to push the community to put more money into them in the first place. We're working with RISC OS developments on user experience. We've had quite a lot of conversations with them about the browser port, for example. There's quite a lot more that we believe when you're new to RISC OS and you try it, you can see a gap between other operating systems and RISC OS. So we want to identify what's the most obvious bits of deficiency in RISC OS as a user experience and try and fix those. The browser is one of them.
Wi-Fi is probably the other big one.
Wi-Fi is another one, yeah. We're also looking at working with third parties on bringing RISC OS to new platforms. And there's one in particular that we know about that I can't talk about but is imminent. And we're always looking to get RISC OS on new platforms. I think that is particularly important to keep it as a living, breathing operating system. If you stick it on the existing hardware and you don't keep moving it forward, it will die. So we're very positive about bringing it to every new generation of Raspberry Pi, about bringing it to every new generation of Beagle board and Panda board and every new board that comes out. We want RISC OS to be on it. And that, I think, is pretty much that. So, questions?
Yes.
Yep. Hello.
You talk about only trying to get to work on new platforms and new hardware. I mean, were you thinking of non-ARM processors?
Not initially, no. So it's still quite heavily tied to ARM, and I think it's going to have to stay that way for the time being. In the future, who knows, but I worry that moving completely away from ARM loses you some of the uniqueness of RISC OS.
Because with Castle, it's almost like our first commandment that it must, we were told it must always run on ARM processors. And if you suggest anything else, that was blasphemy.
Well, now it's open source, you could port it to something else if you really wanted. It'd be a lot of work. Yeah, I'm not sure the result would be something that's all that special. So,
Yeah, okay.
yes.
Steve, what is your business model now? I mean, presumably when you set them all up, at some point you hope it will be a commercial going company which will pay people and so on. I mean, is that still your aim?
No, it was always supposed to be a not-for-profit for a start, and it was always supposed to be a reason to go out and do stuff, because we're paying for an accountant to do some accounts every year. We really should be motivated to do some work as well. Putting a name on it also gave it a focal point for the community as well. We wanted it to be an entity, a thing that people could associate with. But we always said, we'll do this work voluntarily, we won't pay ourselves for our time. And that was RISC OS Open's operating model, was to voluntarily do the stuff that we think is important to keep shoving RISC OS forward. There was always the other side of our business where we hoped that by making RISC OS relevant and alive, we could stimulate development that's commercial development. So if someone wants some commercial RISC OS development to happen, who better to do it than the people who know all about it? So we do offer professional services, and it's not just RISC OS, it's for anything ARM based as well. If you need some people who are really good at ARM, then there's quite a few of them associated with RISC OS Open. So that was a completely firewalled internally part of the business doing consultancy, and that still happens. I think nowadays, because of this open sourcing and the desire to fix the DDE blocker issue and the recognition that there's loads of work that we want to do, like moving away from CBS, which represents a lot of work that only we can do, and our time is precious, we have family lives, we have day jobs, it's hard to justify. So I think the old model, the operating model of we don't pay ourselves, we just voluntarily do what needs doing. 12 years of that, I think we realised that we've done enough. We keep ticking off all the things that we set out to achieve. That's why we think that a slightly different model, the model needs to change. So we haven't decided how it needs to change or what we're going to change. But I can't help feeling some commercial sponsors with a well-defined roadmap could just say, right, well, I'll sponsor you and do these items on your roadmap, and then we could set aside time, pay ourselves, and actually deliver those items, or coordinate so that other people deliver them and pay them as well. We can move things forward that way. I think increasingly it's going to have to move to that kind of model because we can't just keep volunteering all the time.
So it's a forking question. It's not a coding fault, it's a funding fault.
Yep.
I have dilemma at the moment. I was offering me a laptop. I could pay $400 for it.
Yep.
Or I can give you $500 towards Wi-Fi. I really prefer to get something called It's a dilemma.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think it's a confusion of heart and how we fund it. I've given a lot more money to God than I've given to Google. I don't like that but I never had an opportunity. I didn't know it. There's never an opportunity really to put money in school. The way it was so clear a year ago when they said they did that in a browser. I believe the browser is the most important thing in this. That's why I can't recommend it to any friends or my children. I can't huge. It's a big deal for this.
Yeah.
When they come along and say, give us some money, because I'll have a browser, don't get it. That's another story.
I think so. I think there's a conflict of interest between how a bounty scheme and RISC OS developments represents, in a way, or there's a competition there. However, we speak to RISC OS developments quite a lot now. So an increasing coordination needs to happen there. And I think there's an inevitable future where the RISC OS development model and our bounty scheme merge together into something more transparent, easier to manage, and where there isn't a confusion about who do I give my money to, this one or that one. There's only one thing. There's a roadmap and there's people that will make sure that roadmap gets delivered if the money arrives. I would like to see that happen. How we do that precisely needs to be thrashed out, but I think Rod is still sorting out how they operate and what their priorities are, and when they've settled down a bit, I think we'll have some conversations like that.
So do I give my £100 to you or
That's a very good question.
You don't have a Wi-Fi belting, do we?
Sorry, was this a RISC OS development talk? Rule, of course.
Is there a Wi-Fi belting?
So at the moment there's some networking bounties running. I think we're on the first one, and the second one is a biggie. I think the second one, correct me if I'm wrong, but that one did include Wi-Fi support. But I think we set the target at about £14,000, and I can't stress, the targets that we put on a bounty are not the moment where it will start work, where the developer is already there, lined up and ready to go, and they're just waiting for the totalizer to reach there. It doesn't work like that. All we did was we said, we can give our best estimate of how much work that is in man hours, and then we assign burger flipping McDonald's wages to that number of man hours, and that's what our target is. If you imagine a big piece of work and a real developer coming out of the commercial world, they'll see that target and they'll say, well, I'll set my build environment up in that target, but then the rest of the money needs to be paid to pay for the rest. So there's still an amount of difference between what different people are willing to do that work for. But £14,000 as a total for our bounty, for that one for example, is already, it's at the very top end of what I think our bounty scheme can ever manage. All the previous evidence shows that just getting a bounty to £2,000 is very hard and takes a long time. I'm not convinced that the community can actually stump up £14,000 for something like that. Which is another reason why we need the commercial sponsors, I think. And I think people like RISC OS Developments might take your £100 and say, actually, we'll get that work done within that bounty for £14,000 by summing up all those £100 that their customers get. Or they could just outsource that to someone else to do that Wi-Fi work, which might then conflict with what we were planning in the bounty. We need to be careful of that. But I think the onus is on us and RISC OS Developments to coordinate rather than diverging from each other.
Yep. It would make more sense for RISC OS Open and RISC OS Development to merge under the one umbrella in the long term.
Maybe one day. I mean, maybe.
Otherwise,
but they formed for a reason. And they feel like they have a particularly unique thing that they need to do.
the Apache license, there's nothing stopping a fresh RISC OS Limited, RISC OS Open Ltd split where we get Wi-Fi or something on RISC on ROD,
well,
and we get
the only thing to stop that is the fact that no one wants that to happen right now.
I know.
Yeah, Andrew doesn't want it to happen, and Richard doesn't want it to happen, we don't want it. So I don't think there's a danger of that right now, to be honest. We're not in that situation where there's such an abundance of RISC OS developers that there will be forks popping up left, right and centre. I think I'll be happy just to have one piece of development happening anywhere.
Or maybe just whether it happens intentionally or not, or maybe it just happens in the confusion as to who funds what.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I don't worry about that particularly. I think anything that they end up developing will end up being merged back in correctly and we'll be fine. I'm not overly concerned about that. Lou?
Well, it's linked in that point. You were talking about 14,000 banks being the biggest. So I guess partly plans having a development time.
Yeah.
And that makes decisions which parts are small bank being more which one is a bigger one that needs more corporate or a wider service more substantial.
Yeah, indeed. And even RISC OS Developments are contemplating taking smaller amounts of money into their pot. And Andrew's there scratching his head about how do we manage that from a practical standpoint. And I'm just thinking, well, our bounty scheme is already doing that. So maybe if RISC OS Developments and Rule are transparent jointly on here's the thing that needs to happen, then we can provide a bounty that's a ROD bounty. So it's a £32,000 bounty, and they've already stumped up 28 grand or something, and then the remainder is still open and outstanding on the bounty webpage. Maybe that's one way that RISC OS Developments and Rule can coordinate this thing together.
Bounty or the reward scheme, like the money side of things, the payment side of things, being a joint venture.
Yeah. So
and then you're not, haven't got the confusion of who do I pay what to do what.
yeah, I think we'll see how it pans out over the next while.
Yes.
Next. Any more questions? No. Oh, one more.
Just one.
Yeah.
You mentioned moving away from CVS would be a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
Talk briefly about what that involve, I imagine.
What would that look like?
On RISC OS as a problem.
So it would look like, okay, I'm going to stick my neck out here and say this is my view, it's not the rule view. My view is we will migrate to Git. It will probably be a Git repository with several Git sub-repositories in it. So we can preserve individual history of individual components. We will put it in GitLab online. We will probably set up some sort of build pipeline that includes the toolchain as well, so that one of the stages is that it builds stuff. And that way the whole rule bug tracker on our website would be retired, CVS would be retired, we've moved to the proper distributed model using GitLab for that, and if people want to submit code reviews, then it's normal Git way of working. Submit pull request or whatever.
Would you go to that on RISC OS, or
it would
be working off an external system and announcing files?
I think in an ideal world we'd have someone do a RISC OS port of Git as well, just to close the circle, but I don't think that's a blocker if we haven't got that to start with. I think I'd rather get rid of CVS, move to Git, put it in the cloud, and allow people to use modern workflows. And then people can stop complaining about the code review process being quite opaque at RISC OS Open, which it is. We've got a submissions email address, and you submit your zip file, and then when you get the zip file, we open it and we swear because it wasn't a load of patch files, it was someone sending you some raw source files and saying this was. So it's a lot of work for us, managing submissions the way they currently work, but the problem with it is it's all behind closed doors and no one sees it happen. Whereas with things like Git and the way it works nowadays, it's all out there on the web and you can see it. You can see that someone's got this new thing and they've put it up for code review, and you can see the comments on the code review, and you can see why it's going around for another iteration. So we like that and we want that, and we've got lots of experience of that in our day job. So I think that would be a great thing to have, and I think that would be an item I would put right near the top of the roadmap. And sorry? No idea, probably. Yeah. Yeah. But I think that's an example of a great thing that we really should do. It gets rid of some significant barriers to entry, but it would take a certain amount of time for someone quite close to RISC OS to do it, and that time wouldn't be able to come for free, I don't think. So you heard Rod talking, or was it Andrew from Rod saying that they want to see, they have 3 pillars, or was it Richard said, we've got 3 pillars of RISC OS development, and the third one was about development tools and seeing those move along. I think this is a precursor. You have to do this to get into a modern development world. So I would be banging on their door saying, can you cover a couple of man weeks at a time and we'll do this piece of work. So that's probably a conversation that will be happening imminently. I'd like to see it happen soon. All right.
Central resources such as
that would still be us. Yeah. That still needs some elements of confidentiality around it.
Like the slide numbers,
yeah. Some people don't want people to know what they've registered until they're ready to release their thing. Allocations will stay the same. Okay, thank you everyone.